Okay, so for this problem, I want to look at redox chemistry, oxidation and reduction. All right, so let's say we have manganese 2 chloride. So MnCl2, and we react it with potassium. This is the type of reaction you actually have to do in a solvent that is not water. I should probably finish my sentence. So that's a solid, that's a solid. What we end up with is elemental magnesium and potassium chloride. Now, in this particular equation, I'm kind of cheating because I've chosen one where everything is a solid, so we're not going to need to write out a net ionic equation the way we do with aqueous reactions, but I'll do an example of that in a different video. First and foremost, we need to balance this equation. One manganese, 2 chlorides, 1 chloride, so we're going to have a 2 there, and now we need 2 potassiums. In terms of oxidation and reduction, what we need to identify is who is gaining electrons, who is losing electrons. So let's put the charges in. MnCl2, manganese 2 plus, chloride is 1 minus, we have 2 of them. Potassium is an element, so it has no charge. On the product side, now manganese is an element. In other words, it's not combined with anything. Therefore, its charge is now 0. Potassium chloride. Potassium forms +1, chloride forms -1. So if we were looking at this, manganese 2 plus, if we were looking at this in terms of how electrons are moving around, the manganese 2 plus goes to manganese 0. The only way that can occur is if it gains 2 electrons. Gaining electrons is reduction. So the manganese 2 plus undergoes reduction. It gains 2 electrons. And I'll just write it in terms of just gaining electrons. And we'll write out the equation in a second. Potassium, 0 to +1. That means the potassium is losing electrons. So the potassium must be undergoing oxidation. So gaining electrons or losing electrons. So if we write this out as a chemical formula, before I forget, chloride. Chloride is not actually gaining or losing any electrons in this particular reaction. If I was looking at it simply in terms of who is gaining and who is losing electrons, the manganese 2 plus would pick up 2 electrons to become elemental manganese. manganese. And the potassium, two potassiums, would be losing those 2 electrons, going to potassium plus 1. Another way of stating what I just did here, this is reduction, this is oxidation. I would say potassium is the reducing agent. Manganese 2 plus is the oxidizing agent. Potassium gives up 2 electrons. I should specify that. Each potassium is giving up 1 electron. So it's a total of 2 electrons that are given up, 1 from each of the potassium atoms. The manganese picks up both of those electrons to go from manganese 2 plus to manganese 0. Again, and manganese 0. It's always understood if it's an element, it's 0 charge. If somebody's gaining 2 electrons, something has to be losing 2 electrons, and vice versa. So that's something to always keep in mind as you're looking at a redox equation, that the number of electrons being transferred, gained and lost, must be identical.